Actually watch this. Oh, I got that. I gotta get the VLC back up. All right. So what I'm gonna do, I got one program that has it on sound and one program that shows it to me in audio and visual. So I'm gonna hit this one first. It looks to clearly understand 6 to me. Okay, so you can see there a little bit of it with the fingers there wasn't the best counting in the world. I don't know exactly what was going on, like what that was necessarily evidence of, but it's still interesting and important to me. Okay, so I lost my spot there a little bit, but we'll get back into it. So we read that. S1, that's where we stopped. The interpretation of these observations is limited by their informal nature and small sample size, so don't trust the video in that one. However, the observations are supplemented with 20 years of observation by the Everetts as trained linguists in their analysis of the Piraha language. One particularly interesting finding is that hoi appears to designate roughly one or a small quantity whose prototype is one. Most of the time in the enumeration task, hoi referred to one, but not always. An analogy might be when we ask for a couple of x's in English, where the prototypical quantity is 2, but we're not upset if we're given 3 or 4 objects. However, we surely would be upset if given only one object because the designation of a single object has a privileged status in our language. There is no concept of roughly 1 in a true integer system. Even the informal use of the indefinite article ax strictly requires a singular reference. In Piraha, hoi can also mean small, which can contrast with oji, which is big, suggesting that the distinction between discrete and continuous quantifications is quite fuzzy in the Piraha language. Year 2, experiments in nonverbal numerical reasoning. On my second visit to the Piraha villages for a 2-month period, I developed a more systematic set of procedures, thank God, because those were not good, for evaluating the numerical competence of members of the tribe. Maybe I'd use a different word. The experiments were designed to require some combination of cognitive skills, such as the need for memory, speed of encoding, and mental spatial transformations. This would reveal the extent to which such task demands interact with numerical ability, such as it is. Details of the methods are available on Science Online. So the methods are online, not really in here. We're going to see what this paper gives us. I'll show you the methods too. You can go check those out. If it's open, I'll show you them now. So let's, no, I got to click the link in here. I'll show you at the end the methods. There were 7 participants who included all 6 adult males from 2 villages and 1 female, 1 woman. So this is a study of 7 people. Great. This is going to be great, right? Like, I like the study, but I also don't. Like, there's parts of it that I'm like, okay. This is one of those parts. I'm like, ooh, only 7 people. Most of the data were collected on 4 of the men who were consistently available for participation. The tasks were devised to use objects that were available and familiar to the participants: stacks, nuts, and batteries. The results of the tasks, along with schematic diagrams, are presented in Figure 1. These are roughly ordered in terms of increasing cognitive demand. Any estimation of a person's numerical competency will always be confounded with performance factors of the task. Because this is unavoidable, it makes sense to explore how performance is affected by a range of increasingly demanding tasks. So let's go look at those methods. You can kind of see some stuff up here, but they have a supplemental methods page that we can access. I can't access it just by going to it. I have to access it by clicking this little link down here. Oh, it's not this study. It's this one right here. So click the little link in the PDF. Oh, I did. Yeah. So I'm not really looking at the participants, but they're telling us what we just learned. I want to see what the tasks were. The basic procedures for experiments A through D involve sitting at a table. So they got somebody doing there. Okay, cool. Sitting at a table opposite a Piraha participant with a stick dividing my side from theirs. So you can actually see it right here, okay? So that's kind of how they set this up. On one side, I presented an array of objects, either small nuts or AA batteries, and I asked them to place batteries one at a time in one-to-one correspondence with the array on my side of the stick, and to make it the same again. When the participant appeared to be finished, I questioned whether the array was the same. When they assented, I would go on to the next set size. In other tasks, I asked participants to copy the lines drawn on paper to choose which of the 2 boxes contained candy and tell me when a can was empty of nuts. See detailed descriptions below. I always began with small quantities of 1 and 2 to get participants started in understanding the task and making it clear what they were to align the batteries in one-to-one correspondence with the target set. All participants picked up on this procedure rapidly, and I then randomly selected random other quantities for testing. I made sure that I came back to test the small set sizes to ensure that there were no order effects. All right, this one clearly isn't a published task, but or isn't a published method. It's kind of poor. I didn't really understand much of that. I mean, I get it, but not really. I think I'm going to get it here. So here's a specific task, a one-on-one line match. This task was simple one-to-one mapping of evenly spaced batteries in a linear array. No memory or mental spatial transposition was required. Cluster line match. In this task, a cluster, i.e. a nonlinear configuration of ground nuts, was presented to be matched by participants in a linear array of batteries. Unlike the first task, it was not possible to simply map the arrays in a one-to-one fashion. Also, this task does not allow participants to simply produce an array that matched the overall amount of stuff, since the individual items in the target and match sets were of different sizes. Accurate performance will require mapping spatially transposed representations of individual objects from one display into the other. Several participants revealed a mapping strategy by orienting the batteries so that each pointed to an individual target nut. Such a targeting strategy would be very, very familiar from their everyday use of bows and arrows for hunting and fishing. Okay, that seemed a little weird. Orthogonal line match. You see how they're they're perpendicular to each other? Here, the presented array of batteries was perpendicular to the matching array constructed by the participant. Again, matching could only occur on the basis of some mental spatial... I'm not going to read everything. Uneven line mask. The presentation array was a line of batteries that was unevenly spaced. I originally predicted that this would lead to decrements in performance compared to the simple mapping task. Paradoxically, the uneven presentation of items appeared to benefit participants for quantities greater than 7. Okay. So, interesting, right? I think that's a finding I've never picked up on before. And I read papers multiple times. And that's interesting. So like, you ever just look at something like a pattern, and then all of a sudden, like, you just kind of couldn't count? The pattern just kind of took over as a whole. Yeah, I think that's going on here. I think this might have more to do with just like patterns than not patterns. Now this kind of makes me, the method that he's requiring them to respond in may be a method that doesn't help them see quantity, because like the pattern becomes a whole. If he allowed them to just present it however they wanted, then it might have been better. I get the concerns. The concerns is they'll just match, but still, like, I think I think that's an interesting point. Line copying. This task involved copying lines on a piece of paper. Okay, that's all I'm going to read on that one. Brief presentation. I think this one's cool. This was like the cluster line match, except that the array was seen for only about 1 second, thus requiring a memory-based representation of the array. The procedure involves setting up a nut cluster behind a screen. I don't think I'd be good at this. Rotating the screen forward to reveal the objects and back again to conceal them. All participants had previously performed other tasks. Cool. Nuts in a can. This task also required participants to store the numerosity of an array in memory. In this task, a cluster of nuts was laid out in front of participants for about 8 seconds, allowing close inspection and encoding of quantity. The nuts were then put into an opaque oatmeal can. I then pulled out one at a time, and participants were asked if there were still some nuts in the can, or if the can was now empty. If they said it was empty but it was not, or if it was empty and they said it was not, they were shown whether or not there were any nuts left, which was often met with great mirth and laughter, whether right or wrong. Okay. Candy in the box. In this task, participants saw a hard candy, a highly favored reward, being placed inside a plastic audio cassette case. Wow. On the case was a picture of a number of fish ranging from 1 through 6. Okay, cool. Genius. The candy was placed inside the cassette case, and then it was hidden behind the presenter's back. The presenter then brought his hands forward to reveal 2 cassette cases, the original and another with either one more or one less fish on the front. Participants then chose which case they thought contained the candy. If they were correct, they were given the candy. This task again required encoding numerosity in memory. However, the response was a 2-choice recall, and therefore, I'm just going to leave that. Okay, so they got different tasks at different complexity and what you actually have to do. So, nuts in a can, you can't see them anymore. You place them in there. You got to be able to count how many are coming out. You put them in, how many are coming out. Candy in a box, you got symbols. Symbols that mean numbers. Can you learn that? Can you develop that knowledge, and can you do well in the candy in a box task? Brief presentation, that's memory, right? It makes it more difficult. Line copying, that's just copying the lines. Uneven line match, we talked about that, made them better. Orthogonal line match, like that. Cluster line match, and one-to-one. You can see they kind of get more harder as you go on. And essentially, I think if you see only differences on the difficult ones, it doesn't mean much. If you see differences on the easy ones, like, that means a lot more. So let's look at the data. So I have to go back. Remember, I had to hit the button to come here. All our data are basically right here. So we can see, you can read figure captions. If you're a biologist, have a few biologists in class, this is going to come naturally to you. It's good to read the figure caption, but also it's good to not just ruin your mind and force yourself to read all the time. So right now I need a break, and I like looking at the data, and I like figuring out what it means. So proportion correct. 1, 2, 3, 100% on the line-to-line match. It got a little worse got a lot worse after 3 and kind of stayed worse. Got a little better at 8 there. Interesting pattern. Cluster match, about 100% for, you can't have a cluster of 1, so for 2 and 3, about 100%, and then you see it drop and drop and drop. The orthogonal line task. So yeah, the orthogonal line task, you can see perfect for the first 2. Drop, 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 drop. Little rise, drop, 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 right? Weren't very many participants, but they're not really able to do that very well. The uneven line match is showing us something interesting. So like when I like to look at data, I like to look for what's going on. And I see that like, oh, it suddenly drops off, then it gets better. So at smaller quantities, there's like this distraction thing going on. It's not really working. But for higher quantities, it appears to come back for a couple rounds. I don't know why. And then it starts to decrease. For this one, they should have kept going because I don't know what that means. But it's also, if you look at A up here, you can see there's an increasing pattern there and an increasing pattern there at about 6. I don't know what that means. In terms of line copy, this looks... I would have predicted this to be a little bit easier, but you could draw the same number of lines. I didn't really read that one. Maybe it's harder than I thought. But you can see a consistent decrease. You get 2 right, and then you got 1 right, 100%, and then a pretty good decrease. Here you get, for the brief presentation, you get perfect on the first 2, and then decrease. Nuts in a can, that's real hard. That's real bad even with 2. And I'll point that out, like... You know, with memory and all that, if you place 2 nuts in a can and one comes out, right? Like, and you struggle to say how many are left, right? For me, that's hard to fathom. But if you don't have a language for the idea of 2, it's not. But going back to last week's discussion, that language was like the program that was controlling us. We kind of ate it, you know, and then it turned on these thoughts of others. Well, here... You know, I wonder if language is doing the same thing. Like, I've been running a math program in my mind so long that it's just always there. And candy in the box task, pretty good, right? Not great. You still got 75%, but you don't see the drastic drop off. Maybe when the incentive's there, things are pulled up. Maybe this is more of a critique of the way we run things. Maybe not everybody wants all. Right? Like, anyways, you can see the data here, and you can see a consistent tendency where these simple tasks get worse, you know, as the numbers increase, right? So in this group of people that do not have words for numbers greater than really 3, you see that at the point of 3, essentially, on every task, 3 and less, you get really bad performance. Performance starts to go down. You got a weird one here. But look, this one, the easiest one you can see, still shares some of that pattern. The cluster one definitely shares that pattern and all that. So you have a situation where we're looking at the data, and it's very clear what's going on here. But it's also not clear from a scientific standpoint because we don't have, like, the statistical methods. Like, these are just data points. These are just 6 data points. I'd like to see an average graph of this. I'd like to see standard deviations of the estimates around each point. I would map them on number. So like some of them would lose data, but from like 9 to 1, 8 to 1, 9 to 2 or whatever. That one starts at 2, so 2 to 9, and looks like this one starts at 1 versus 2, so sort of the same thing. And I'd just kind of I'd average it across all to see what the average pattern is. And then I'd want estimates of variation on each of those points. I want, what's the estimate of variation at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Because one of the things that they're kind of arguing is that the further you get away from 2, the worse off you're going to get. Well, what that could mean, like some of these weird bars, you might have some people who did really well and some people who did really poorly, right? I would expect that those error bars would tell me quite a bit about what really is going on here. So I would love to see this turned into an average pattern too. Ultimately, the data clearly support that counting beyond 2 was difficult. I want to keep reading this, but we get the main thing. If I were on my own, like if this were just me, I'm done here, and I'm reading other things that help me understand it. I'm reading more about the superior whorf hypothesis. I'm reading more of these things, but ultimately, I do think this was cool because, people have experience with numbers, they're trading and things like that. But without the language, it was really, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's really tough to conceive of numbers greater than 9. I'd like to see it go out to 20, honestly, the data, but that's pretty interesting. If your culture only has languages for 1, 2, and many, it's hard. You can tell when something's bigger and smaller than something else, right? Which may be why the candy in the box task wasn't actually all that bad. But you can't identify specific quantities. Now, there are alternative explanations, which I think are worth exploring. I think number one, like this whole pattern idea, right? Like forcing it to be in a linear line. It's a very Western way to view things. So, like, I like the nut task. I think that one's a little bit more culturally appropriate. The candy in the box task, I would like to see a control to this where they have the words that they use on the boxes and see how well they do. Some symbol of it. There has to be some symbol. I know that maybe it's just a verbal thing, right? Like, I don't know, right? We don't know what the written language is like because I didn't read that supplemental document. But if it is what I'm assuming, I'd like a control where it's, the 3 different words, right? Like, and see how well they do when those 3 different words are there. Same number of quantities with the 3 different words, because like one of the questions I have is how much do they trust him? How much are they just messing with him? If I were doing a study like this, I would be worried like very smart people are living here messing with me because they're bored, right? Like that's what I would like these six dudes that came back and kept doing it. They clearly had to know him and stuff. I'm just pointing out that it's a little weird. Okay. In the matching task, A, B, C, and F, I set across from the... Okay, I'm not reading that. We get that. We read all that. Okay, let's see. In all of these matching experiments, participants responded with relatively good accuracy with up to 2 or 3 items, but performance deteriorated considerably beyond that up to 8 to 10 items. In the first simple linear matching task, performance hovered around 70% up to the largest quantities. Matching tasks with greater cognitive demands required mental transposition of the sample array to the matcher array without benefit of tagging for numerical quantity. Performance dropped precipitously, like rain, to 0% for the larger target set sizes in these tasks. One exception was task D with unevenly spaced objects. Although this was designed to be a difficult task, participants showed an anomalous superiority for large numerosities over small. Performance initially deteriorated with increased set size up to 6 items, then shot up nearly perfect performance for set size 7 through 10. A likely interpretation of the result was that the uneven spacing for larger set sizes promoted recoding of arrays into smaller configurations of 2 or 3 items. You should test that then. Go back with 2 or 3 items. You got to see if this holds up. And I'm not blaming him for not doing it, but this is something that needs to be done, right? Because I don't necessarily think he's right. I think it's more of a focusing on the whole. I don't think it's necessarily... we're kind of on the same world here, but I think patterns can really mess up people's counting ability. I know that from a fact. I do a lot of building stuff, and I'll have 15 of the table legs that I need, and I only have 12, and I thought I counted them, and it's hard when things are lined up in a row to count them out. But still, if that's his idea, that's an easy task. We can take twos and threes. We can see like just rows of twos, right? Groups of twos. Like let's see if they can get up to 50 correct. Let's give them a chance, right? One of these weird tasks. Okay, put these on the table. Can you match? Can you put sets of two nuts in there as well, right? Like there might be something they're missing here. When time constraints were introduced in task F, exploring the ray for only 1 second, performance was drastically affected there and was clear correlation between set size and accuracy beginning at set 3. A line drawing task was highly affected by set size, being one of the worst performances of all. Not only do the Pirahã not count, but they also do not draw. So, okay. Producing simple straight lines was accomplished only with great effort and concentration, accompanied by heavy sighs and groans. The final two tasks, G and H, required participants to keep track of numerical quantity through visual displacement. In one case, they were first allowed to inspect any array of nuts for about 8 seconds. The nuts were placed in a can and then withdrawn one at a time. Participants were required to say after each withdrawal if there were still any nuts left in the can or if it was empty. Performance was predictably strongly affected by set size from the very smallest quantities. The final task involved hiding candy in a box. We read about that, blah, blah, blah. We know what happened. There's growing consensus in the field of numerical cognition that primitive numerical abilities are of two kinds. First, there is the ability to enumerate accurately small quantities up to about 3 items with only minimal processing requirements. I originally termed this ability parallel individuation, referring to how many times one can encode a discrete, unique individuals at the same time in memory. Encode has discrete, unique individuals at the same time in memory. Without overt counting, humans and other animals possess an analog procedure whereby numerical quantities can be estimated with a limited degree of accuracy. So humans and animals before culture is what I'm picking up here. Can tell if there's a lot or little. Like we can see that. That you can tell if this group has less than that group. You just may not know how much. And I can kind of remember this. When I was a kid, I couldn't really count very well. And I remember that stuff. Like I remember learning how to count, being confused by numbers. Right, I do remember that. And the only reason I'm not confused by them now is because I spent a lot of time working with numbers. So I think that's important to recognize. Like, is it culture? Is it lack of language? Is it just lack of experience with it, My question with these studies is, could you actually teach folks to learn the quantities? And can you teach it to them without symbols? So I would approach this a different way. Like, okay, they don't have the knowledge now, but can they develop it if they were given some experience? Because that's all culture is, right? Like different experiences. It's not a totalitizing set of principles. It's just, some experiences that we share that allow us to engage in actions together. So without overt counting, humans and other animals possess an analog procedure whereby numerical quantities can be estimated with a limited degree of accuracy. Many researchers believe that large number estimation, although based on individual elements, is coalesced into a continuous analog format for mental representation. For example, the discrete elements for a large number array might be represented as continuous length of a line, where a longer line inexactly represents a larger numerosity. So what they're saying here is that in our mind, we're not remembering the actual number of quantity. I will agree with that. We might be remembering an area or a length of a line. Is an analogy that was kind of poorly used there, but still was used, right? Like you might see something as a line of a certain length, right? A big line. You'll see that, this one's big. Like in your memory, that group of batteries that was a big line. That was big, right? And you might see the other one, that was small. And so that's kind of what they're saying here. We have this general process for when we remember stuff over a long period of time to just focus on large or small. We lose those little details.
When people use this analog estimation procedure, the variability of their estimates tends to increase as the target set size increases. Period. I want to see variability estimates now on these specific data points. That means I want to see, well, he's going to give them to me, but I want to see them around each of these points. Like, what that's saying is that the range of scores got a lot more. Has, like in this graph, the range would be greater here than here. And follow my mouse, like then here, and then here would be less. Here would be less. You see, I'm moving it up and down less, and then this would be almost none. Okay. So the ratio of average error to target set size is known as Weber's fraction and can be indexed by a measure known as the coefficient of variation. Don't worry about this. The standard deviation of the estimates divided by set size. Math stuff. Although performance by Piraha on the present task was quite poor for set sizes above 2 or 3, it was not random. Figure 2 shows the mean response values mapped against the target values for all participants in the simple matching task A. So let me see that here. So let's go over here to figure 2, mean accuracy and standard deviation of responses in matched tasks, and B, coefficient of variation. So A, mean accuracy and standard deviation of responses. You can see that there's knowledge there. That's what's being shown to us. So in this graph where the means are represented by these diamonds, right? You can see that if you average everybody's graphs together, all their scores together, you can see that when the quantity was lower, on average, the group did okay. When you average them together, they got okay, but there's still... Here's what's really important. What I like about line graphs. You can say, okay, we expected a 7. What did we find? Found about a 6. We expected an 8. On average, we found about a 7. Expected a 5. On average, we found just a little bit under 5, like 5.5. We expected 3. We found 3. 2, we found 2. 1, we found 1. 4, going over, looks like we found kind of less than 4. 5, found maybe 5 at 5. 6, I was trying to go over, right? A little bit less than, maybe at 5 there for 6, and at 5 it's like a little bit at 4.5. So 7. So 7's basically at 6, and 8, as we said earlier. So when you're looking at this, you can see that it's increasing. It's just not a perfect increase. In terms of standard deviation, so that means on average, how much did scores deviate from the mean? For scores 1 and 2, you had a 0 standard deviation. There's no deviation. Everybody got it correct is what they're saying here. For 3, the variation went up. For 4, it went up. 5, it went down a little bit. But look, overall, the variation in the data is going up. And then they got the coefficient of variation, which you don't have to worry about, but it's showing the same thing. Whereas fraction, blah, although performance by the Piraha, the present task was quite poor for set sizes above 2 or 3. It was not random. Figure 2 showed what we just said. I wouldn't even necessarily read this. I'm just doing it for you. A, B, C, D, F. The top graph shows the mean responses, and the target values are almost identical. This means that the Piraha participants were trying hard to understand things. They knew the stuff. The lower graph in figure 2 shows the standard deviation of the estimates increases in proportion to the set size. Yep, we talked about that. Resulting in a constant coefficient of variation of about 0.15 after set size. So this is a stat I've never heard before, but the variation, it's basically calculus. So what's going on here? No variation. They plotted the variation, essentially, the change in variation. So from 0.1 to 0.2, there was no variation. From 0.2 to 0.3, there was a good amount of variation. From 0.3, This one, there's a lot less here, and you can see it goes down right there. Oh, variation again, about the same level, a little bit less from 6 to 7. You can see that. Little, constant, then a lot of variation. So you can see that on average, like the variation really is showing that after the point that their language no longer has a word, that's when they start to do bad. That's what you're seeing. That's when the variation starts to go up. That's when the answers start to make no sense. So those are actually pretty good stats. You got number one, on average, they were doing pretty good, but there's a lot of variability in their data. When you look at the variability, you can see that the variability is pretty much constant before 2, and after 3, it's at 2 to 3 where most of the variability happens. That's it. That's the data right there. Getting back into this. Data for individual tasks and individual participants were consistent with the average trends shown in Figure 2. Graphs are available in the supporting online materials. See Figures 2 and 3. The results of these studies show that the Piraha's impoverished counting system limits their ability to enumerate exact quantities when set sizes exceed 2 or 3 items. Now I'm going to say that data right there, that data presentation won me over. I'm not necessarily wanting this to be the case. I'm not a big Sapir-Whorf guy. I'm more of a language impacts us when we use it guy, which is like a little different because Gordon here is basically arguing determinism, right? Like that the language is impacting your thoughts all the time when you're using it or when you're not, right? So here in this set of studies, they should really limit the use of language and see what happens. But that's impossible. So a good scientific study here would take away the language, right? Completely. Because if language is like a program that you turn on when you use it, then if we can get rid of the language, if my theory is correct, then we can get rid of any differences between different types of participants. So if we would take the Piraha versus, I don't know, U-Wall, right? And sort of not let anybody speak or use their fingers or do, like really, really interesting stuff, not use words. You can't use any words. You can only think in numbers and you have to speak out loud only in numbers, right? So that they can't do, right? Like just see if you could really bring out if it's this determinism or if it's this use thing. Because I think they're using their language while they're doing it. And I think their language is facilitating poor performance on these tasks because it doesn't have a word for it. I don't know what it's facilitating in their life, but I'd really love to learn more from these folks because I'm more interested in how they escaped colonialism for so long. I think that's very interesting. But anyways, going back to this specific question, it's like, okay, I like it. Clearly the number system is hurting the performance. But is it because they're using it? Is it the use of the number system? Is it like really is this just a difference in culture? And I don't mean it people in cultures. I mean it in cultures. What do the Piraha care about? We clearly care about finances, profit, money. We're going to need to learn about money and math, right? So like the counting thing, like how important is that? How important is that in a group of people that you can trust, right? Maybe one of the reasons we have to count is because, everybody went to the store and hoarded all the toilet paper, right? So now we have to count mine versus yours. Is that a natural human process or is that one that we assume is a natural human process? This article suggests it's not a natural human process. This article suggests that language is going to shape your ability to think. Now, this article versus the last one suggests that it determines it. Even in situations where you're able to count, like in a trading situation, more or less, like you're not using the words once you pass the 2 and 3 point, if you forbid those words, how would that impact performance, right? I think these are interesting questions because we're really trying to figure out here, how does language impact us? And if you notice, let's take a step back from this. Our language currently is obsessed to some degree with language, right? Particularly offensive language. And I think it's a good change. But what's inherent in our belief system? That the language that we use creates the thoughts that we're capable of making, right? I mean, I understand there's other reasons to reduce people's, bad, inappropriate, problematic language, right? But there's also the part where I think a lot of folks know and believe that the languages we use create our thoughts. So if we can limit those languages, we can limit those thoughts, right? And I think that's the first response that you see a lot of the time, and we're seeing a lot of it right now. I don't think it's a bad thing, so don't take me that way. But I am pointing out that culturally, we're making this change. We're saying like, oh, we're gonna police our language a little bit more, and we're also gonna police your language to protect others, right? But behind that is the idea that language creates thoughts. Also, I'm sure there's some ideas that language creates pain in the others who hear it, but it's not just about that. I believe we want to change other people's thoughts with that one. And so this is time. This may seem unrelated. It's about counting, and that by itself is totally boring. But when you put it into our own world, we're like, huh, does saying things or not saying things affect the way we think? Does saying more things affect the way we think, affect the way we see ideas? Does the way we describe social constructs affect our beliefs and perception of people who are of those constructs, right? Like, or ourself who is of that construct? I think these are all interesting questions, and it comes back to my interest in race. Like, we created a word that patterned our whole society, like the whole world, really. And I just think about that, like, wow, one word can do that. This case is like so small, but it's just what scientists do. It's like, where can we get at this bigger question by going small and controlled? Now, honestly, do I think it's the best study? No. But do I think the data is compelling? Yes. Right? I can't explain away this data. I tried a little bit. Um, it's not like I'm in love with this paper, but I do think it's cool. But really, that data, you average all those patterns together, you're going to see a really beautiful piece. Participants showed evidence of using analog magnitude estimation, and in some cases, they took advantage of spatial chunking to decrease the cognitive demands of the larger set sizes. This split between exact enumeration ability for set sizes smaller than 3 and analog estimation for larger sizes parallels findings from laboratory experiments with adults who are prevented from explicit counting. Holy shit. Okay. Now you're seeing it. It's a pill again, right? I never caught that before. Um, when you use language or when you don't, it controls your thoughts. That's what we're finding. That's what I'm seeing here. Studies of numerical abilities in pre-linguistic infants, monkeys, birds, and rodents, and in recent studies using brain imaging techniques. So people who can't speak in a laboratory, who could otherwise, struggle over 3. Kids struggle over 3. Monkeys, birds struggle over 3, right? But up to 3, we get it. Maybe 3 is the magic number. Maybe that's actually a thing. 1 too many, right? We all think that way. And I think this paper was misunderstood in the media. It's because of how it was written. But the reason why I chose it was I'm always going beyond this article, right? I'm like, this to me, and I've read it like 3 or 4 times now. This article to me has really shown me like, oh wow, this whole language controls your thoughts thing is true in the moment that you are using the language. So if you want to have unbiased thoughts, stop talking to yourself. Stop talking out loud, right? Think about that. I challenge you for 5 minutes to think without using words. Wow. I was actually trying it right there. I could see stuff, memories and pictures and colors and stuff, but I wanted to describe them. That's how my mind works. But did the minds of humans always work that way? How did we work before language? How are we going to work after it? I used to be an advisor for a club on campus, and like I was on their text, and like it was all pictures, and I found it really cool. I know a lot of people my age are like, oh, you kids, and I was like, that's actually really cool and efficient. I can express my mood with like a Shrek meme or whatever. But these questions are important for the future, right? Like, can we, if our language is pictures, does culture control our thought even more? So I think for me, when I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to keep going. Actually, I'm not. If you want to read the end, you can. Like for me, this is why I read. I read to get these insights, you know? I'm reading to try to figure out how the world works, try to figure out how culture works. And that's why I'm making you write the interface paper. So here you got a situation where a group of people did not get involved in capitalism, right? They didn't. They weren't colonized. Their language doesn't value the numerical system that we value. They can't count above three, just like we can't count above three without our language, which is amazing. Like, this is really falling in line. When you're looking at these two papers together, they show the same thing. Everybody thought language was going to construct your thoughts, but really it's only when you use them. So when somebody says, now this is a good thing too about the conversation that many of us are interested in. When somebody says something wrong, is it going to be more powerful to correct them or to get them to correct themselves? Based on this paper, correcting them isn't going to change their thoughts. Making them say words like non binary to respect trans folks, making people say words like Black Lives Matter, right, is going to make people think about issues differently, right? Like these are central ideas in our world that we're fighting over right now. There is an ideological war that we're kind of a part of. And a lot of us don't really know what's going on. And I feel that way right now. I'm kind of like, okay, we got this pandemic, but we have this political side to it where there are people out there that literally think those of us that are sheltering are being melodramatic. You know, it's just like this weird thing. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from the language that we see, that we use, right? If we use language and call this a flu, which our president did, and then followers of his did as well, right? You're not going to be scared of it. If you're reading the science like me and calling it a pandemic, you're going to stay inside. And if you noticed, right, like I did kind of dip out one day early. I mean, I was not feeling great, but I also was like scared. I didn't want to spread it to anyone else. And I'm also was like, this is going to get serious, right? Like, because it's a pandemic. And so, I mean, I think these are things that we can even see in our own times. But if you got a whole news station calling it the flu, and you got a president calling it the flu, you know, it's not that dangerous. I've had the flu before. It kind of sucks, but you'll get over it, right? But I'm just bringing this out. The words that we use in the moment affect our actions, affect our thoughts, affect how we engage with others, and affect our perception of reality. So to me, what I see here is language is like a artifact that when we use it, we gain not just the knowledge, because we do gain the knowledge of the language. We gain the knowledge, but the attitudes, the beliefs. So culture is packaging these ideas in valuable chunks. It has a piece that we want and 20 pieces that we don't. Behind this paper that no one will probably ever talk about is the fact that a non-capitalist group doesn't use the basic cognitive concepts of capitalism, and the capitalists that ran the study don't really understand that numerical counting isn't really that useful outside of the analog system unless you're in a capitalist system of scarcity. Maeve, I got you. All right. So I'm just saying, like, this is where I go with something like this. And what I'm seeing right now is little chucks of like things that we want that have bad things in it that we don't want, but we take the good for the bad. And this kind of reminds me of ads on TV or like ads on YouTube or things like that. Like we'll sacrifice you in giving me another paid advertisement about whatever issue you want me to believe in, as long as I can watch the show I want to watch. Yeah, I'll see you try to sell me these cars and these cigarettes and this food I don't need. I'm older than y'all. Those used to be on TV. Um, so, like, but give me that TV show. You're going to see this a lot, right? Like, I think a lot of the things we use in this world that are cultural have things that we want and things that we don't. Like, we want to hang out with people like in general, but we don't want to be harmed by them or be made fun of by them, right? Sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. We want to get the knowledge, but we don't necessarily care about the credits or the grades, right? Like the pure thing, the knowledge, is being adulterated by the credits and the grades and stuff like that. We want the freedom to do, earn our labor and do all that. And so we'll take money, and then we take the downsides of money, which we're experiencing right now, right? Culture gives us, we take a little bit of it we want, and we choose to take it, but with that good comes some bad. So there's these little, like, they're almost like cultural viruses attached to things we want. I mean, if you go back even to the racism example, right? Like, you got the construction of race, which, you know, allowed people to just destroy this entire way of life that we had before, right? Because there was a lot of bad out of that, but there was something that folks wanted. I think it was bad for us overall, right? I think we're noticing that. I think these days are giving us something to think about. And I'm not going to think about this pandemic all the time, but in terms of language, in terms of language affecting behavior, in terms of our current media outlets, in terms of the language that we use, this is relevant for all of us. When someone says something wrong, don't correct it for them. Make them correct it. Now I know that's easier said than done. So take the other one as like a fallback plan. Like, hey, that's not the correct word. What word should you use? Oh yeah, I shouldn't use that word. I should use this. All of a sudden, you're activating a pattern of niceness, right? Of friendliness. When you're with your friends and people are talking in ways that they are complaining, right? What's going on there? Well, you're using language to get into your own mind, right? Like when you use these patterns, they make you feel a certain way. And you know this when you turn on your favorite song and you yell those words out loud. Those words have a meaning, they mean something. They carry with ideas that you then carry with you by just saying them out loud. Think about, I mean, I had a different life than you, but I think about some of the first times I saw like interesting movies that used weird words and stuff. And those, like, I'm thinking movies and media. I'm thinking like Marilyn Manson came out when I was a kid. I just remember being like, wow, that changed the way I thought about the world. But so did other things. A lot of music, a lot of words changed the way I thought about the world. Um, you know, like all the like Tupac changed the way I thought about the world. Notorious B.I.G. changed the way I thought about the world a lot. Just like hearing these different ways of being through these different language structures. And then, using different language structures helps you understand things differently, helps you think differently. My advice for anybody that's bilingual is keep using it. Think in multiple languages. The tool, it's basically like having more tools. So essentially, like, I'm at the end of this article and I just see so much here and I see so much in my life, but it's all caveated, right? I see a lot of folks around us thinking that we want to control the language so that it creates the thoughts at all the time. What we need to do is we need to control the language in the moment to create the thoughts. Someone's being someone's being racist, someone's being sexist, you try to get them to say it was racist or sexist. You get them to use the words that you use. If you notice, right, when people use the words of their political party, they think differently, they act differently, they become different people. I've seen this in my own lifetime where people now are picking up different ways of speaking about the world and now they view it differently when they're using those words. So that's really interesting. I went on a little bit at the end there, but it's late. I'm kind of tired, not sure what's going on, and I have nobody here to entertain me to tell me I'm going over. But ultimately, that's why I chose this paper. I think it's telling us something about the interface. Whatever is in the interface, those little snippets we get that we want have little viruses on them. And sometimes those snippets, we just want to be able to communicate with other humans, right? We don't even necessarily see that as a snippet that we're taking. The words that we use, there's more than two, but two studies that we've read show that when you're using the words, you're thinking differently. It enhances and harms different cognitive abilities. And this paper specifically should make you think about, why does this group of folks not have numerical quantity? Because capitalism, they existed before capitalism, before people had to be numerically competent at the level we are today. So sorry that this unboxing was a little long, but for such a short article, but I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to dive into this. I didn't even finish out the last couple paragraphs because you can see what it's about. So, some words to think about.